Welcome to the Real Lawyer podcast, where we get real about life, the practice of law, and everything in between. I'm your host, Joyce Sophia Shu, and our guest today is Josh Fershee, Dean and Professor of Law at Creighton University School of Law in Nebraska. Hi, Josh. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. It's great that I get an opportunity to reconnect with you, Josh. We were colleagues way back when we were both associates at Davis Polk. And then fortunately, thanks to LinkedIn, I think we managed to stay in touch. And over the years, your career's really evolved and grown in a very impressive way. So when I started working on the Real Lawyer podcast, I thought, Josh is definitely someone we want to have on the show. And I want to talk to you about your career path so far and what's going on. So, again, welcome.
Very good. Well, thanks for the opportunity. It is nice to reconnect.
And since we're talking about life and what it's like to be a real lawyer, I want to first start learning a little bit more about you and where you grew up and what led you to law school in the first place.
So I grew up in Michigan, in a college town in East Lansing, Michigan. My father was an attorney. He was actually in one of the first classes that graduated from Cooley Law School when there was no night school in the state of Michigan. And so it's a long time ago. It was a very different animal, but he and a lot of the people he graduated with actually ended up working in government. And so my dad is an attorney, but he really was more worked for trade associations and in the legislature for a bit. So I grew up with a lawyer in the family, but not really a practicing lawyer other than the first, when I was, I don't know, 5 or 6, he practiced law for 2 years, I think. And so grew up around lawyers in one sense, but not really the practice of law, right? It wasn't around litigators or certainly around big law. And went to college. I was a terrible undergraduate. I went to three colleges. So for anybody who's listening who thinks that because they weren't great in college that you can't be a lawyer, I would definitely say that's not true. So I went to the University of Michigan for a year, University of Georgia for a couple of years, and then transferred back home and was at Michigan State for what ended up being about 3 years, though. Didn't do so great. So I had an opportunity to step away and think about what I wanted to do. Unfortunately, that was a time actually where I met my wife on a political campaign before she went back to the University of Michigan, and I ended up finishing up at Michigan State and wasn't really thinking about law school, quite honestly, at that point.
So, your dad never encouraged you to pursue a profession in law, a career in law?
He always spoke very highly of how useful the degree was to him and how you could do anything with it. And so it was something that was, I wouldn't say I was encouraged or discouraged. He always spoke very highly of his training as a lawyer. So it was on the radar. But honestly, when I got done with school, I was really happy to be done. Hadn't been, was proud of how I finished up, but not really that proud of how I'd done the whole path. And so my wife and I moved to Washington, D.C. I worked for a video game trade association and then ended up getting a job in Los Angeles and moved out there to do product launches for Nintendo. And so that was a great experience. And while we were there, my wife decided she wanted to go to law school, actually, after saying for years she'd worked in politics, political organizing, and had said she never wanted to go to law school because all the people she worked with had law degrees and they were doing the same job. And at one point she decided that she really did. And I was like, great, go to law school. I can do public relations anywhere. And after a while, she's like, why don't you just take the LSAT? She had taken it. She's like, why don't you just take it?
Because she
And
thought you would be a good lawyer?
yeah, and I'd thought about going back to school, but I hadn't really decided what to do. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And as she went through that process, then I used her book to kind of learn, how the LSAT works and take some practice exams. And then I took it, and she was like, it makes sense to just go together. Why don't we just do this? And so we applied to schools around the country, really, and ended up going to visit Tulane in New Orleans. And as my wife would say, she knew the minute we got off the plane that's where we were headed. It took me a little longer to catch up.
Oh, really?
It was, I mean, I really enjoyed it too, but for whatever reason, just the fit was good for us at that point in our lives. That she just is, and it's a wonderful city, and it was a great experience for us. So a lot of people, thought we were nuts to go to law school as a married couple. And I always say it either really works or it really doesn't. Unfortunately for us, it really
Right.
worked.
It could be compared to being stuck at home with your spouse during COVID, right? You either it either brought you closer or it would drive you apart.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I was thinking back as you were talking about, when I was going into law school, actually, one of the best advice I got was from someone who had gone to law school by then and told me that it's very stressful, it's very scary, but much of the stress is actually all self induced. And it just helped me tremendously throughout law school. So I actually, even made time for TV, and I remember watching Friends religiously throughout the 3 years of law school. And I could definitely see the benefit of actually, going to law school with your wife and having that built-in support, right? You're kind of going through it together, and have someone else who's in it with you and going through the same stresses and learning about the same things. It that I could see that being actually really valuable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was incredible. I mean, I had the best study group I could ever hope for.
Right.
And we only had a couple of our first year, I think we only had two classes together. And and we studied differently. She actually worked with more study groups. I tended to study on my own, but if I had questions, I would work with her.
Hmm.
We're both reasonably competitive, but fortunately we were just competitive with each other. It's like I don't mind if I finish second as long as she's who I finished second too, right? But it really was good. And we were we'd been married for almost 2 years. We'd been together for I think probably 6 or 7 at that point.
Hmm.
And I turned 30 our first year of law school, so I was a little bit older than the mean, and that probably helped. But it really was amazing for us. We've both been working full time, and so we had a lot of skin in the game, right? We both quit good jobs to go to law school, so there was
Right.
that. But also we were all of a sudden on the same schedule, right? We were stressed at the same time, but when we were done with classes, we could travel. We could go back and see family or go see some friends, or we were on and off at the same time, which is not something we'd experienced for the several years before that.
Yeah. That really sounds lovely. It really sounds also like you're a couple who really know how to grow together, which is
I
probably one of the big secrets to the success of your family and your career.
I, I think that's true. I think one of the things, I'm really fortunate to be with somebody who has been incredibly supportive to me. I think I've been the same for her, and we
Mhm.
have grown together. I think that is a big part of it. And one of the challenges, and at various times we've had to think about, how are you going to navigate two professionals, right? I mean, we are both
Right.
people who value our careers and value our family. How do you balance that? And one of the things that we saw early on in practice, and there are things that I really loved about practicing, as an attorney in New York and then Washington D.C. But some of the advice you would get from people of how to manage your family is like, you can both be professionals. You just need two nannies. You need a day nanny and a night nanny. That wasn't going to work for us because we both wanted to be professionals, but we didn't want to just have kids. We actually wanted to be a part of their
Hmm.
lives and be around them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It sounds like you had a great partner to be by your side through law school. And so you mentioned working in DC. Is that where you ended up in after law school, or?
So we went to New York for just about, really only about a year and a half. And then I ended up getting a job in Washington, D.C. I had decided that I thought I wanted to be an M&A lawyer, and, did some
When did you
rotations.
decide that? It was
I decided, I think I decided that when I did really well in business associations. I'm not sure.
okay.
And going through that process, it was, and I should have known. I did a rotation. Obviously, I worked with you and doing some derivatives. I did some work in
Hmm.
litigation, and then did some work in M&A. And I had a good experience, and I learned a lot. But one of the things that should have clued me in, I was working with somebody who was a couple of years ahead of me, and he said, "Welcome to the M&A group. You're going to love M&A. It's nothing like law school," which should have been a clue to me. that might not be my spot because I am one of the people who loved law school. I thought it was great.
Uh-huh.
And so ended up getting an opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. at Hogan and Hartson then, it's Hogan Lovells now, and went into a regulatory practice, which was really a great balance for me. I mean, I would say when I was in law school, I decided that if I could come back and be a law professor, that's something I'd love to do, but I wasn't really an expert in anything. And when I got to working in an energy regulatory group, I was like, I could practice and do this. I enjoy this. This is a wonderful place. But it was also, this is what I would want to teach. This is the space I would like to be in because I did find it really interesting and fulfilling in a way that was really useful. And it had some benefits. You know, I ended up really going into teaching energy and environmental law and business associations, and there was a lot of overlap there. And so the things that I really enjoyed, both from practice and from kind of being in school, found that pathway that I wouldn't have found, I don't think, had I ended up in an energy practice.
What was it like? Was the environment at work very different when after you made the move from New York City to DC?
It was. I mean, I think the DC, we'd lived in DC before law school, and then coming back, we love New York City. I mean, it's still one of my favorite places in the world.
Yeah, mine too.
But the practice of law was a little bit slower paced. Certainly in the group that I was in. I mean, one of the advantages, you go back 20 years, most of the practice was before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which closed at 5. And so, yeah, and if you needed to get something filed, you needed to get it there by 5.
Hmm.
And so, not to say we didn't work longer hours, but it was a little more structured. Unless you had
Yeah,
like a rate case, which was kind of a big administrative hearing, we could work a pretty solid day, or at least it was not hard to leave and go home and then pick up the work later if that's what needed to be done. And so my practice, at least in that space, was much more structured
yeah,
and steady, and that was really valuable.
yeah. That must have been a welcome change from M&A practice, where I think there's anything but structure
Yes.
or predictability, right? And a lot of times your second shift kind of starts at 5 p.m. or on the weekend.
Well, that's right. And it's like you bill 300 hours in 1 month, and the next month you bill 160.
Right.
Right. and
Yeah.
and this was a much more steady experience, and so that was really good. And it was a really technical practice. I mean, one of the things, I interviewed with a couple different regulatory groups and was thinking, maybe I'd like to do FDA practice or maybe FTC practice or something, and really enjoyed the energy folks. And it was a steep learning curve because it is a very technical environment, and it's kind of own set of rules. But I liked that, of being able to kind of get up to speed and try to get, you know, just it felt like I was learning a lot really rapidly, and I valued that too.
That's great. I'm already hearing a theme. There's a lot of exploration along the way. It seems like, being open to try different things and not afraid to take risks and make a change. So then I think the next change came about then following the regulatory practice in DC, right?
Yep,
You ended up making a move to academia.
that's right. And that was kind of, we thought about going into teaching, and actually that was something I was going to do, and Kendra was not sure what she was going to do, but was supportive of exploring that, and got an opportunity to interviewed for a visiting assistant professor position at Penn State and State College when they were opening their law school. So they needed some legal writing faculty for their new first year class that they were building at the time. And I interviewed for that position and said, we need to figure out what Kendra's going to do. And they brought her in for an interview because they had a number of positions, but in looking at her resume and looking at what they needed, they said, we actually need another person to teach. Would you be
Oh,
interested in
great.
doing that? And she said, yes, absolutely. And so we both started teaching together, and it was a great opportunity. We were there for a year, and had some good mentorship from faculty who were there, and made some friends, and went on the market. We ended up both getting an opportunity to teach at the University of North Dakota the following year. So we moved from, after having lived in Washington, D.C. a couple times, New York, New Orleans, and Los Angeles, we moved to State College and then to Grand Forks, North Dakota. And so it was a different animal. But we had our son was born at that point. He was when we moved to Grand Forks. I want to say he was almost 2 by then, and it turned out to be a great opportunity for us to both get into the academy and be in a spot where it was a good place to have our family start and grow.
Hmm. What did you teach at that time?
So I was hired to teach business associations and energy law. Those were the two main things. So I taught business associations 1 and 2, energy law, and then I taught a couple fill-ins. I taught the labor and employment law a couple of times. I ended up teaching sports law the road. I guess maybe I didn't do that until West Virginia. But it was really interesting when I moved out there. I was really interested in wind energy, which I still am, and was working on, my research was on kind of grid integration for wind farms of how is that going to pick things up. That was about 2007. And around 2008 was when the hydraulic fracturing boom took off right in North Dakota. And so I was there, and I had not done really oil and gas work. I had done natural gas, electricity, renewables, things that were kind of what the companies we were working for were regulated on, and what they were investing in. And that wasn't really a space that I was near, but I was right there. It
Hmm.
was actually about 4.5 hours away from us, but it was in North Dakota, and really moved into looking at that space. And it was fascinating. I learned a lot about a new technology, and there were very few academics who were looking at it because so few people outside of the engineers and people related to the process were just starting to catch up. And so it was a great opportunity to be at kind of the birth of this kind of energy revolution.
Yeah.
And it was really quite an opportunity.
Wow, that's amazing. So when you get inspired and find a passion for a certain subject matter, how did you approach it in this case? I mean, because I'm thinking, okay, if I put myself in your shoes, I'm at this law school. I've taught different subject matters, but this is a somewhat new area, right? Even though you've
Mm-hmm.
dealt with FERC and regulations back in DC. So did you start with academic research? Did you do legal writing, publications, and that's how you got into the community that's focused on it, or how did you go about it?
Yeah, so there, as I was a new scholar, right, and so I was looking for areas, things to write about, and around the country, people were really interested. And so, because I was in North Dakota, I was on the radar for places of, oh, who's the energy law person at North Dakota? Okay, well, let's email him or call him and find out what he thinks about these things. And
Yeah.
the first answers were, I don't know a whole lot. So, but I realized it was an opportunity for me to take some expertise in the field. And so I took the opportunity to write about it and to meet people, talk to different regulators, talk to the people in the state who were doing the work, and got opportunities to write in some law review symposium
Hmm.
issues, and took those opportunities. And so that really, I did start writing about what the impacts were and what that looked like. And it really a fascinating space. And it led to we were in North Dakota for 5 years, and ended up talking to West Virginia University, who was, we were in the Bakken Shale, which is really an oil play primarily for hydraulic fracturing. The Marcellus, which is on the East Coast, which is Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and a little bit up into New York, is really more of a natural gas play. So it's the same hydraulic fracturing process, but for a different fuel source. And they were looking to expand their expertise. And so they talked to us, and initially the answer was, well, there's 2 of us. And so we're not trading 2 jobs for one, but they ended up having an opening in my wife's area. And so we both ended up going there. So my scholarship really led us to that space. And it was a great opportunity there too, because I had to learn, how natural gas works, and it's a much broader space because its uses are different in many ways than what we were doing with oil, right? That was primarily to develop gasoline. There's other fuels and other products that come out of oil, but for natural gas, it was about natural gas for heating. But it really had a huge impact on electricity generation. And so to be able to see that up close and talk to people about the environmental impacts and where it goes, how it operates, I was open to a new opportunity and was willing to jump in with both feet, and it proved to be a really great option for me.
What did you enjoy the most? By that point, you had already taught at three different law schools. I mean, granted, Penn State was just getting started, right?
Yeah.
And South Dakota was much more, perhaps much more established. I don't know much about the law school and its history.
North Dakota was an old law school. It's the only law school in the state, and so that was a great opportunity to get plugged in.
Hmm.
I still have contacts. We have former students, and in fact, one of our former students is on the faculty at North Dakota now. Fantastic professor now,
Great.
and this know people in the court system on the Supreme Court and the federal judges there. So it was nice being part of a small bar, and that was true when we went to West Virginia too. West Virginia is the only law school in the state of West Virginia, and so that was a really both were different places that I'd never visited until I interviewed, and so it was I might have driven through West Virginia before, but I don't think I'd been to Morgantown anyway. It was really both were great experiences, and both were you're the only law school in the state, you have a unique relationship, I think, with the bench and the bar, and so both were great experiences. The you know with, you get very big skies in North Dakota, but the landscape in West Virginia was prettier, I will say, with not to say anything negative about my North Dakota experience, but the West Virginia
Hmm.
mountains really were something special, especially this time of year.